All right. So, a couple things off the top. All right, we're excited to get going. A couple things off the top. I posted an announcement that the CL sessions this week, there'll be a couple of the leaders that can't do it. And so here's kind of an updated list for this week. There still should be a available location every day and time slot. There's just a fewer locations at a couple of those times. So make sure you're kind of checking this if you go tonight or Sunday, where the locations are for those CL sessions to make sure that there's going to be someone there. Don't use the kind of Excel file that's on Canvas because two of those leaders aren't going to be able to do it this week. Okay. The other announcement I posted, which I will update after class, I did end up making it to office hours yesterday, kind of as scheduled. Tomorrow, I thought I'd be around the afternoon. I'm going to get pulled away from my office, so I'm only going to be there from 10 to 1:30. If you'd like to meet tomorrow sometime between that time slot, send me an email, and I can try to make sure I carve out some time in there. Got a couple people who want to stop by, get their exams. So what I'm doing in terms of that, I'm not going to sit down and work through every single problem. I'll give you the exam, kind of have you work through the ones you got wrong. And then if you have any questions over those, then we can kind of work through the remaining questions that you have, right? So that's kind of what I was doing for everybody yesterday who stopped by. So that's kind of where we're at for this week, kind of updates. I think other than that, I don't have any logistical things other than you've got, excuse me, this kind of class questions from last class. I think I realized it was only on Top Hat. It wasn't on Canvas, just to be fair, in case someone missed that. I kind of have it set to be due at the end of the day today now instead of the beginning of class. I didn't realize that that link wasn't on Canvas. You could have, this time it was still there on Top Hat, so I'm sure how many of you still got on and got it done? Yeah, a good amount. But just to be fair, right, I'm going to kind of make sure that if it didn't remind you of that, that was supposed to be due before we met today. So there's a link there. I'll update it after class on Top Hat as well to allow you to work on it until the end of the day today. We'll also have the class questions that we covered today. That'll be due before we start class on Tuesday. You'll have module reading, which will be for module 11. You'll also have that 10th quiz pop up after class. Both of those are due at the end of the day on Monday, as always. All right. Other than that, any questions for me before we kind of dive into the rest of the material for the week here? Okay, pretty sparse here today. Is there something I'm not aware of that's going on? Got people leaving for flights and stuff. Maybe it's just getting close to Thanksgiving. So we left off last class thinking about this idea that in the short run, we can see positive and negative profits. And that potentially, if those profits are negative, we said we have one more thing to check, which is if the profits are, so when we're finding this profit maximizing quantity, that's assuming we're staying open. It can be the case that it's actually better for us in the short run to just shut down, in which case we said our profits will become what? We were kind of remember. So if we go back here, well, where's it at? We've got a profit equation somewhere. There we go, right? There it is. So our shutdown rule, we said, anytime this price falls below average variable cost, then staying open, we're just adding a larger negative value to our profits. So if we shut down, the quantity we produce will be what? 0. So what would our profits be if we shut down? Just our fixed costs, right? So it can be more optimal sometimes in the short run to simply shut down. If we stay open, we're just going to have even larger losses. So we'll see some examples of that here today. The three kind of ranges we were talking about, and we didn't kind of have a visual of this. This is kind of where we ended last class. But we said anytime that price is above the minimum point or average total cost. So I'll also mention, I think there was a slide, I want to say it was 17. I had the visual, this marginal cost was shifted over a little bit, so it wasn't quite hitting average total cost at its minimum point. I've updated that on Canvas so that the PowerPoints now should be doing that, because we always know the marginal cost will hit the average at their minimum point based off of module 9, right? We said as long as that marginal cost, what we're adding to the average, if it's below the average, the new average has to be lower. If the amount we're adding to the average was above the old average, our new average has to be a little bit higher. So the point where that marginal cost hits our average cost curves, is at its minimum point. So when we have these perfectly competitive markets and we have some equilibrium price, we said that's also what for the firm? That's there. I'm selling the good. I'm charging the price. So that's the additional benefit, which for a firm, we call that revenues, right? We said the optimal quantity is going to be where marginal revenue is equal to marginal costs. What is the marginal revenue in a perfectly competitive market? Simply the price. So anytime the price is above approximately 3 here, well, then our marginal revenue curve, we earn the same amount of money. We said we can't deviate from this equilibrium price. So every unit we sell, the marginal revenue is the price. So our marginal revenue curve was horizontal. So for any price in this green range, marginal revenue is going to hit marginal cost somewhere above the average total cost curve, right? So anything in this green range, our marginal revenue will hit marginal cost at a value that's above our average total. So if we go back, just kind of remembering the most basic equation or not the most basic, but one of the equations we have for profit. If price is above average total cost, we know profits would be price is above average total. What'll be true about this value? Positive, right? Anytime price falls below that average total cost, or what we would call kind of that break-even point, that minimum point of our average total cost curve, now any marginal revenue line, which is just the price, that's below that, it's going to hit marginal cost at a point that is below average total. So anything below that minimum point in our average total cost curve, we know their profits are going to be negative, right? Price is below average total cost, profits are going to be negative. Now, you can think of, if it's easier, you can think of this equation, right? Average total cost, I said you can think of that as your per unit cost, right? We can also think of price as our per unit revenues, because every single unit we sell, what's the additional revenue we're getting? Simply the price. So what would like the average revenue be? Well, it's always the same value, so the average is going to just be that value. So what's in parentheses there, it's really like your per unit profits, right? Your per unit revenues minus your per unit costs. So anytime your per unit revenues are greater than your per unit costs, your profits will be positive. Anytime that price falls below, right, your per unit revenue would be below your per unit cost, your profits would be negative. Now, if we're in this yellow range here, price will be, marginal revenue is going to hit marginal cost at a price that's below average total costs. So we know profits will be negative. However, we said as long as that price is above the minimum point on our average variable cost curve, we're actually minimizing our losses by staying open. Right? So if we go back, we broke down total costs into variable and fixed costs. Anytime price is above average variable, we're adding a positive amount to profits. By staying open, we're minimizing our losses, right? We're adding some positive amount to profits there. So anytime price is above that minimum point of our average variable costs, but below the minimum point on our average total, yes, profits will be negative, but they're not as great of negative values if we just shut down. Right? Anytime price falls below average variable, well, we said we're just adding another negative value here. It would have been optimal to just shut down and pay our fixed costs. So this yellow range, where we're in between the minimum point and our average total average variable cost curves, that's going to be negative profits, but we're minimizing our losses by staying open. As soon as that price falls below the minimum point in our average variable costs, that's where we said it's actually just more profitable to shut down and just lose our fixed costs. So, right, that red range would be where profits are negative, but in the short run, we shut down. Okay. So we kind of left off with this at the end of last class. We didn't have kind of this nice visual giving us these kind of 3 different ranges. Now, you can also, I guess, rote memorize. I wouldn't suggest just rote memorizing things. I would always kind of suggest trying to learn the concepts and why this applies. But here we can think about it this way. Price, it's just very like almost dumbed down, but price is a good thing for firms, right? Costs are a bad thing. If the good thing is greater than the bad thing, then I'm going to have positive profits, right? So anytime that price is above my average total, positive profits. Anytime price falls below my average total, well, now the good thing, lower than the bad thing, I've got negative profits. Now, there's not as quite of a simplistic way of thinking about the next range, which is, well, once that price falls below my average variable costs, right, then we know profits will no longer simply just be negative, but it'd just be better if we shut down. Right? We'd be better off if we just simply paid our fixed costs. Okay? Excuse me. So just working through a couple problems, and these are actually some of the top hat questions that I'll show you towards the end of class today. But what would my break-even price be here? So I didn't label any of these curves. And this one doesn't really have a lot of relevance for us other than kind of reminding us what the cost structure of a firm looks like. What would this red curve represent? As I produce more, it's always decreasing. So that would be my average fixed costs. This blue line, although kind of extreme on the tail here, it's hitting these other two at their minimum point. So that blue line should be my marginal cost. And I know the black line and the green line, which one has to be average total? Well, if average total is my average variable plus my average fixed, average total has to be the one that is higher. Okay? So if I'm looking for my break-even price, that's the price at which profits will be equal to 0. So that's going to be, if the price hits that marginal cost curve, that blue curve, and that price is exactly equal to the average total cost at that quantity, well, then when we calculate profits, any quantity times, well, price and average total cost are the same, price minus average total cost will be 0. We know profits are going to be 0. So that break-even price for us here would be what? These are $25 jumps, so $275, right? Any questions over anything I said there before we kind of add to this? Okay. What if I wanted my shutdown price? Well, I have one of my images shut off here, but it's kind of for a reason. I just wanted to really highlight, okay, this marginal cost curve technically is going to go kind of past this point, right? But we know that if the price ever falls to where it would hit marginal cost right at that minimum point of average variable cost, that's going to be what we call the shutdown price, right? If the price ever falls below that, we know the firm is going to shut down. So for us here, that would be at a price of 175, looks like. So we can identify the break even and shutdown price based off the minimum point of the average total average variable cost curves. Now, what might be a little bit trickier if I had something like this? Well, this one's not as tricky. We'll skip this one. So what would the break even price is 275, the break even quantity here. Oh, wait. Break even, not shutdown. Break even quantity would be at that quantity of 300, right? What might be a little bit trickier is, what if I had a price of $450? Well, first of all, even if I don't get too lost in the visual, what's the minimum point of my average total cost curve? 275. Is the price above that? Yes. So I know that profits are going to be positive. So the next thing to determine is, well, what quantity would maximize my profits here? It's going to be the quantity where marginal revenue, which we said is just the price of the good in a perfectly competitive market. So where does that marginal revenue line of 450 hit my marginal costs? Looks like it's at a quantity of 350. Now, at that same quantity, my price is 450, but what are my average total costs? 300. So now it goes back to simply using that profit equation. I've got the quantity, I've got the price, got my average total cost. So my profits will simply be the difference between price and average total cost. So 450 minus 300, multiplied by that quantity we're producing, which what I say, was it 300 or no, 350, right? So 350 times 150 should give us that 52,500. Okay. Now, there we had an example where profits are positive. We could do a similar thing. If the price ever fell below average total cost, you could still determine what profits are if they're negative, right? It would just be, price is below average total, so that difference that you have there in your profit equation would be a negative value. We'll also kind of work through some examples here later on in class where we'll see sometimes I can calculate those profits, but they're actually going to be a larger negative value if I just shut down. Okay. So we'll revisit a couple of these at the end, just kind of make sure we have the right answers. What we're going to now kind of do is we know that in the short run, some of these firms are going to shut down, right? If that price ever falls below average variable, what's the supply of every firm? The price falls below average variable cost. We said they just shut down, so the quantity that they supply is. So in the short run, we kind of have this weird disjointed supply curve, right? For really low prices, we just keep on supplying zero until that price level of that good or the price level of the market rises above our minimum average variable cost. Now from there, as that price gets higher and higher, it's going to hit our marginal cost curve up here. We're going to produce higher and higher quantities. So this starts to look more like what our typical supply curve looks like. But in the short run, it is kind of disjointed here where there is a quantity where once the price falls below this point, we go right from producing like what, 4.75 to zero, right? So it's a little bit different, right? Now, our industry supply curve, right? Here we were looking at the supply curve of each firm, right? Our industry supply curve is going to be if we took every single firm in that industry and then every single price added up all of their supply, all of their quantity supplies. Now we'll get into this here in a little bit. But you know, some firms in theory could have different cost structures, although in our perfectly competitive markets, we typically start out assuming they all have similar costs. We'll dive into what happens if they don't here in a little bit. But our short run kind of market equilibrium is going to be once these firms make their short run quantity decision, add up all those firms' quantity supplied, that would give us market supply. So we go back to like module 3 and all the other stuff we were doing before the exam. All of that, we were only looking at market demand and market supply. Now we're kind of making this differentiation between individual firm supply and then the entire market supply curve, okay? So as we move from the short to the long run, we'll start to think about some of the differences that we would see here. So our long run market equilibrium is going to be eventually just like before, where supply in the market is equal to demand in the market, right? But there might be some, time in between where we don't quite get to this long run equilibrium. So what is that going to look like for us? So let's say I'll walk through the intuition first. Excuse me. Well, I already spoiled that a little bit. We're going to walk through the intuition first, and then I'll kind of give you some visual representations of it. So anytime in the short run that the price is above our average total cost, right? We have positive profits. What are firms going to want to do? So I should say firms. What are people who are thinking about getting in that industry going to want to do? Well, if I see everybody else making positive profits, I want to get involved in that industry, right? So for example, once Tesla started actually turning a profit on their cars, what do we see every other firm do? Well, now GM's got electric cars, and now Kia's got every other car company started to do the same, right? They started getting into that electric car industry or market. So as firms enter, what's going to happen? Well, we have higher number of firms. What's going to happen in market supply? It's going to increase or shift to the right. Going back to module 3, an increase in supply does what to the equilibrium price? Pushes it down. As the price starts falling, before price was above average total cost, as price falls, it's getting closer and closer to average total cost until profits would be exactly equal to 0. So firms will enter until they push that price down low enough where now profits are 0. Now, is there any incentive for any firm to enter that market? Well, if they did, they're going to push the price down even further. Now the price is below average total cost. Now profits are going to be negative, right? If we have negative profits, what are firms going to want to do? So anytime that price falls below average total, now that there's negative profits, nobody's going to want to enter that industry, but some firms might end up leaving, right? As they leave, market supply decreases back, the price gets pushed up until we're back to this point where profits are equal to 0. So you can kind of have these firms make it's not that they're always going to be perfect at getting exactly equal to 0. We might take time to kind of oscillate between that profit being equal to 0. Some firms will enter and exit, but eventually we'll get to that point where profits are equal to 0. So I'll give you one depiction of this, and then I'll draw out another, and then I'll talk through an example I think is somewhat kind of relevant that maybe helps kind of solidify this. So let's say I start out, here's my market supply, market demand, right? I'll use the example of I see them all over Bloomington, but these like fake pot shops where they're selling like Delta, what is it, 9, 10, I forget which one's not real weed, but like they're selling like all this stuff that's probably just terrible for you, right? It's created in a lab, but they're everywhere. Drive around Bloomington, there's, I mean, every couple blocks there's a couple of them, right? So what's probably true about that industry, at least maybe they've oversaturated now, but a year ago, what was probably true? At the current price, there were positive profits to be had in that industry, right? So what is everyone doing? They're starting up their own company. They want to get involved into that market. As they do that, what's happening to the market supply? It's increasing, right? Firms enter the market. As they enter, what's happening to the equilibrium price of these products? Decreasing. At our new price, which is the marginal revenue the firm faces, where does that now hit marginal cost? Well, before at the old price, it hit marginal cost up here at this higher quantity, and price was above average total cost. We had positive profits. As these firms entered, it pushed down the price, and what happens? They push it down until we get profits equal to zero. Now, what could happen is, let's say too many firms enter this industry. Right? So they keep on pushing the price down, and we see something like, holy cow, not like that, like that. There we go. So let's say, we've got our market, we've got our firms. You can think about, here's the quantity of the firm, here's the quantity in the market. I want there to be, so let's say, supply, demand here. Here's kind of the current price. So this is the marginal revenue that these firms are currently facing. Right? So let's say too many of these firms entered and they pushed the price down so low that our marginal costs and our average total cost were somewhere here. Well, where's the optimal quantity for the firm? Where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. However, that price, right, is below the average total cost of the firm. So if price is below my average total cost, what are true about my profits? Yeah, this rectangle would represent my profits. It's just that they're negative, right? So these firms, maybe too many of them entered the industry. They pushed the price down too low, right? So what's going to happen over time? Well, in the short run, right, we would have an average variable cost curve in here. But as time goes by, what happens? Everything becomes, so we've got fixed cost and variable cost. In the long run, we can change everything. So in the long run, our average total cost curve is the exact same as our average variable cost. So in the long run, if this were the current price, what would firms do? Shut down, leave the industry. As they do that, let's see if I can get pretty close. We're going to then see a decrease in market supply. Right? Here's our new kind of equilibrium price at this new marginal revenue. Where's the optimal quantity for the firm? So this is where it's a little bit counterintuitive. We had these negative profits. So what happened? Firms exited. As firms exited, though, for the existing firms, the ones that remain, how much are they actually going to produce relative to before? They're actually going to produce a little bit more. Right? Now, price is exactly equal to average total cost here, so profits are zero. But as firms leave, the existing firms that remain, some of them might produce a slightly higher quantity than they were before. Right? But all of this hinges on one of the main traits we talked about last class. Seeing that these profits will be driven to zero, I'm assuming through all of this that firms can enter and exit this market at will. Right? If I ever had something like the pharmaceutical drug market where they have patents, well, I can't just start selling a drug that someone has a patent on. They'll, sue me or put me in jail, whatever the government does when they regulate these patents. And so we can still see positive profits in these markets where we don't allow firm entry and exit. But if we have perfect firm entry and exit, we'll see that the profits in these perfectly competitive markets get driven down to zero. Okay. Any questions over this before we kind of keep moving? Yeah. Over here? Yeah, so this is going to be each individual firm's decision based off of what the current equilibrium price in the market is. Yep. Any other questions on this before we keep moving here? So let's see. I'll leave this up in case people are copying it down, but I really have a very similar thing in the slide here. All right. Let's say we start out with a price. That's the firm's marginal revenue. It hits our marginal cost curve at a quantity where the price is below average total cost. Price is below average total. We said there's negative profits. What do firms do? Some of them leave, right? As they leave, what happens? The price increases. Our marginal revenue is going to increase up until the point where we're exactly back to that minimum point in our average total cost curve. And now profits are zero. There's now no incentive for a firm to either want to enter this market or exit this market. Okay. So there we've got kind of both scenarios, right? We could have positive profits, negative profits. We'll have free entry and exit of these firms. We'll get back to this point where profits are equal to zero. Okay. Any questions on that? I got the quantity in there yet. So the quantity could be a little bit higher for the existing firms. Okay. So it's kind of weird, right? Because the existing firms are producing more, but because there's fewer of them, we actually end up with a market quantity that's a little bit lower. Okay. This is the idea if like we had two firms producing 10 units each, total market quantity would be 20. If I have one firm producing 15 units, total market quantity is 15, right? Each firm, that existing firm produced more, but the total in the market was actually lower. Okay. All right. So with this in mind, in the long run, we know that this entry and exit of firms is going to drive us down, not to just the lowest point on our short run average total cost curve, but also the lowest point on what we call our long run average total cost curve. So just to kind of remind ourselves, well, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here and then come back. Where was that long run average total cost curve coming from? Remember, we said in the long run, we can change all these factors of production. So all of these fixed factors of production, we can change them. We can move to like a larger production facility. The larger the production facility, we might be able to lower our per unit costs, right? As we want to produce more and more. So, excuse me, in the long run, firms will enter and exit, but also alter their things that were fixed that they can change over time, moving to these lower cost curves. And in the long run, we'll get driven down to this minimum point on that long run average total cost curve, where all the economies of scale will be exhausted. Firms have chosen the long run factors of production where they've lowered their per unit cost as much as possible. Okay. So jumping ahead a little bit there, just to kind of explain or kind of remind us where that long run average total cost curve comes from. But in the long run, everything basically is equal. I shouldn't say everything, but a lot of the things we've talked about are equal. Average total cost is the same as average variable cost. It's the same as our marginal cost, right? It's hitting it at the minimum point. Marginal cost, when we make profit maximizing decisions, it's where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. Marginal revenue is equal to the price of the good. All these things are going to be the same once we get to that long run equilibrium. Okay. Questions on that? We'll go through a little bit more of this, some things that can kind of change the market and what can we see in the short run, or as we're moving to this long run, what is it going to look like, right? Okay, because in the short run, right, things are going to change. So how will firms respond to changes in the market? So let's think about, we have this existing firm, right? They're currently choosing, where are we at? Here's the market quantity. Right? Sorry, market quantity. Here's the market equilibrium. So this is the market price, is $14. That hits their marginal cost right at its minimum point. So these firms were earning, let's say we thought we were in, at least temporarily, in the long run equilibrium. Everyone's profits are equal to zero. We're at the minimum point of that average total cost curve. They've changed all the fixed factors of production they possibly can. They're on the lowest possible point on that long run average total cost. Then all of a sudden, I don't know, some celebrity endorses their product, right? Well, what's that going to do to the demand for that product? Increase it, right? So we can have these short run, what we call shocks to a market, right? We can have these things that doesn't have to just increase demand. This could be something that decreases demand, right? Maybe, I don't know, your spokesperson, gets in trouble from doing, I don't know, maybe it was, Diddy who was pushing your product and now there's a huge demand decrease, right? So we've got these things that will shock the market. As soon as we see a demand increase, what's going to happen? Well, in the short run, that price gets driven up, right? That demand shift will push the price up. So at this higher price, that's now my marginal revenue. Where does marginal revenue equal marginal cost? Well, once again, it's not get too lost in the graphs. If demand for a product increases and that increases the price, is a firm going to want to produce more or less? More. And if that price is higher, if they were before earning zero profits, what are their profits going to be now? Higher, or if they were zero before, they're now going to be positive, right? So at this new optimal point for the firm where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost at the new equilibrium price, price is now above average total, I'm now earning positive profits. So as a result, what are other people going to want to do? There's positive profits in an industry. Other people are going to want to get involved in that industry. You can think about this, like we could break this down to like financial markets. Like if you see that people are making a bunch of money off of specific stock, right? What are other people going to try to do? Invest into that stock. It's the same idea, right? These companies are going to want to get involved in that market. So as a result, supply increases. As these firms enter this market, well, now our new demand curve is like this D2 here. Our new supply curve is here. They'll enter until we get to that point where we are now back at the minimum point in our average total cost curve. So things can change in the short run that will like temporarily increase or decrease our profits. But if we have free entry next to firms responses will always be either to exit or enter, pushing those profits back either up or down towards zero, right? Depending on what side we're on. Okay. So you got to think about in the short run, we might change our production decision to be a little bit higher. As more and more firms enter, that price gets driven down, and we're back to that minimum point in our average total cost. Okay. Any questions on this before we keep on moving here? All right. So, I think I just have kind of what all those steps are just in shorthand, right? Short-term demand increase, price will get driven up. Now we have positive profits. As a result, firms will enter, pushing the supply curve up, which drove our price back down until we got back to that profits being equal to 0 point. Any questions on this before we keep moving here? Yeah. What is what? So in the long run, right, if we have firm entry and exit, what price are we always going to see? It's always going to get driven back down to that $14. Yep. Okay. All right. So, whoops. There you go. This is something that honestly, I'm not going to probably like throw a bunch of questions at you, but trying to tie together everything we talked about throughout the semester to the new topics. In the short run, right, everything, right, I'm locked into certain things, right? I can't change them. In the long run, I can change everything. So in the short run, am I going to be more or less elastic? If I can't change as many things, I'm forced to be more inelastic. So what would perfectly inelastic look like? We said that would be perfectly vertical. So in the short run, our short run supply curves are going to be a lot more inelastic. Firms can't respond. They can't change how much they're producing overnight, right? Even if there's shocks to the market, demand increases, they can change it some, right? I'm still locked into the same production facility that I have. Now, in the long run, as I can change more of these fixed factors of production, Well, once I see that, the price of electric vehicles is increasing, the costs are decreasing, maybe I can alter my production process to where I can actually be a lot more responsive to price changes in electric vehicles if I can change my production facilities over the next 5 years. So long run supply is always going to be a little bit more elastic or flat. We said slope and elasticity aren't one-to-one, but they move in the same direction, right? The more elastic, the flatter the slope, the more inelastic, the steeper our slope. Okay? So this kind of hinges on not just firms being able to change their factors of production, but also the fact that they can make the decision to either enter or exit that market in the long run. Overnight, even if there's positive profits to, opening up one of these THC shops, I can't start a business tomorrow, right? It takes a little bit of time for me to find a facility or find a building, right? Get all the product. So in that long run, firm entry and exit can also be a little bit more responsive. Up to this point, we just talked about it changing fixed factors of production. But one of those things that's also going to make long run supply a little more elastic is firms can enter or exit easier the more time they have. Okay. So kind of already went through this. I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to draw this out for us. I know I've got a slide for it, but I think I think building it out might make a little bit more sense here. I like PowerPoint, but sometimes the animations aren't all what I want them to be. So let's say I'm back to thinking about the quantity of the firm, right? And, well, what do I want here? Let's say I've got the current price and marginal revenue of the firm is somewhere like here. I've then got their marginal costs. And we'll start out in a scenario where their average total costs are right here. So marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost at this quantity, right? Which means profits are equal to what? Price is equal to average total cost, profits are 0. Okay? Now, if I'm a firm in this industry, what I might try to do is come up with ways to lower my cost. I can't, maybe, it's a lot. I don't have any influence over, we said no one firm has any influence over the price, so they don't have any influence over shifting demand, right? There's just a small piece of the pie, right? But what they could do is whatever that price is, well, if that stays the same, but I can lower my costs, I could increase my profits. So what might I try to do? Find cheaper alternatives. I'm making cereal, use high fructose corn syrup instead of actual sugar. If I'm, trying to, I don't know, maybe I find workers who I can pay for a lower amount, right? Kind of under the table. Maybe I find some young kids who want to work like dogs and, scrap an old building. So I don't have to pay them near as much as I would a legal worker, right? So there's all these different cost-cutting techniques that firms can do. Now, they could also do something more legit, like, oh, okay, well, we realized that we could move our production facility somewhere larger and actually lower our cost that way. So what's that going to look like? So here's my marginal costs now. And I've also shifted my average total cost curve. So now where is the profit maximizing quantity? Where does marginal revenue equal marginal cost? A much higher quantity, right? So what is true now in the short run? Well, price is above my average total cost. So price is above my average total cost. What are true about profits? I now have positive profits. So if I can move to this lower cost structure, lower my marginal cost, which inherently is going to lower my average total costs, right? Part of how we calculate total is going to be the additional cost from producing something. So if I can lower my costs or my cost structure, I can go from earning 0 to positive profits. Okay? Now, what's going to happen if I've done this? All of the other firms, let's say like I find this like new ingenious way of lowering costs no one had thought about before, right? There's all times companies trying to do this. As soon as I figure out a way, what do you think everyone else is going to do who's making that product? Imitate me. Right? So we see this a lot in business, like firms will kind of try to imitate each other, right? if I see something that you're doing that's lowering the costs, well, if you're getting positive profits, I'm getting zero. I want a piece of that. I want a piece of those profits. I need to try to imitate what you're doing to lower my costs as well. Okay? So, excuse me. For firms, they want to move to these lower cost curves, which is when we're thinking about all those different short run cost curves, that's essentially what they're doing when they change the fixed factors of production, right? Currently, it might be the case that the current price is right here, and all the existing firms are operating off of this short run average total cost curve. So what do? Well, if profits are currently zero, we try to change the fixed factors of productions, enjoy these economies of scale. Now that price, I've lowered my costs, right? I'm earning positive profits. The only problem is then what does everybody else do? Imitate me, lower their costs. Firms enter that market until they drive the price down. So now this new cost curve I'm on, now the price is down here. Well, then I find other ways to lower my costs. Once everybody else does that, people thinking about getting in the industry see now positive profits. We see more firms enter, the price gets driven down even more. And this continues until we get down to that long run equilibrium where we've done everything that we know possible to get to the lowest possible short run average total cost curve. And firm entry exit has pushed that price exactly to the minimum point on our long run average total cost curve. So this is kind of the process, right? I kind of have here that you would see used, right? I could move to these lower cost structures. Now I can enjoy positive profits. But then over time, people either imitate me. Now we're all kind of enjoying positive profits. Now what happens? People enter, push the price down. Is this a good thing? Well, for the firms, it's not, right? This firm entry and exit always ensures that even if I can lower my costs initially and enjoy positive profits, I know that if there's positive profits and firms can imitate me, more firms are going to enter that market, and it's going to drive the price down to this minimum point. Who's that good for? You and me, consumer, right? So we love perfectly competitive markets as consumers, right? It's going to drive the price down. Okay? I think if there's anything else I wanted to say here. Where are we at in time? Okay. I have something I'll hold off. If we have time, I'll cover it. So that should be it for the slides, but I do want to kind of work through. Oh, where are we at? Here's Top Hat. We'll go through these questions a little quicker because some of them we already covered. And I do want to try to get to that one topic that I have because I think it's pretty relevant. So these are going to be the problems that we're looking at today. So we already talked about this one. If we've got, or something similar, if we've got these cost curves and the current price is $225, right? So at that current price of $225, where does that hit my marginal cost curve? Looks like it's at a quantity of $275. At that price, what's true about my profits? Price is below average total cost, so my profits will be losses or negative. But that price of $225 is still above my average variable, so I should stay open, right? So I'm going to continue to operate even though I have negative profits. If the price ever falls below what? 175, well, there I know it's just better to shut down. Okay. So there we kind of said they're going to operate with these negative profits. Okay. What if instead I had, what's the value of profits if the current price is 450? This is the same one we worked through earlier. Where does marginal revenue hit marginal cost? At a quantity of 350. The price is 450. Average total cost is 300. Plug that into our profit equation. We had that profit level of 52,500. So these are already the problems that we worked through. Okay. We're going to skip this one. Or no, we're not. This is the one I wanted. So this third one. Okay, and now I'm giving you kind of this table, right? This is a little bit trickier. So I'm going to try to write this out before we swell. You can see it on these, so that's good. So I'm looking for here. So I've got quantity is 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. I've got my total cost and my total variable costs. So 500 800, 950. No. Did I skip one? No. 1200, 1550, 2000, 0, 300, 450, 700, 1050, 1500. So I think the question asked about where the shutdown price is. Well, how the hell do I figure that out? Right? I know the shutdown price is going to be whenever that price falls below my average variable costs. So if I know my if I know my total variable costs, how do I find my average variable costs? Simply divide that by the quantity. So, right, we'd have what? 30, divide this with 2250, 23.33 repeated if I'm doing math in my head correct. This would be what? 26 point something. Someone can help me out or I can come back to it. We've got 1500 divided by 50. This would be kind of 30. Right? Is this 0.125? Somebody want to help me out? What was it? 0.25? Okay. So what's the lowest, what's the price? Once the price falls below what value here, will I choose to shut down? So as soon as the price falls below the minimum point of our average variable cost, what's the minimum point of our average variable cost? 2250. All right. Any questions on that before we keep moving? So here, so the quantity would be 20, but I think the problem actually asked for what that shutdown price was. So the shutdown price would be 2250. Yep, that's the answer to the question. Now, I want to throw in something a little bit trickier. Let's say that I was told, so I've got price is equal to, what do I want here? I think I want 35, right? So let's say the price is equal to $35. What is the profit? What's the profit maximizing level of profit for the firm? So this gets a little tricky. Well, I know price is also going to be my marginal revenue. If that's my marginal revenue, how do I determine what quantity would maximize profits? Wherever marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. How do I find marginal costs here? It's the change in my total costs divided by a change in quantity. Well, here my changes in quantity are all 10, makes the math a little easier. So total cost goes up by 300, divided by 10, gives me 30. Change in total cost is 250, divided by 10, 25. Wait, am I looking at this right? No. Sorry, what's the change in total cost here? 150 divided by 10 would be 15. Change in my total cost here would be what? 250 divided by 10, so that was 25. Change in total cost 350 divided by 10, 35. Change in my total cost 450 divided by 10 was 45. So I can determine what the optimal quantity is because where does that marginal revenue equal marginal cost? Right here at a quantity of 40. However, is that price of 35, is it above or below my average variable cost? Well, it's above, right? So I should be kind of earning a better profit than if I just shut down. But we can kind of prove that to ourselves with what would my average total cost be? Well, what do we have for time? So I think we got enough time to do this. Yeah, do this right away. So this is 250, just double checking. This is 35. Yeah, perfect. So let's say I had, we can just calculate average total cost here. My total costs are 1550. My quantity is 40. So I'm going to be at what? 30. Someone want to help me out before I can get Excel open? No. 1550 divided by 40. is, nope, 38.75, right? So my average total cost here is 38.75. So what should the value of my profits be? The quantity times the difference between price and average total cost. So my price is 35. My average total cost is 38.75. What's going to be true about my profits? They're negative, but should I still stay open, right? Well, I could compute these and kind of prove to myself what I've got 35 minus 38.75 times 40 units. So I'm got profits of what? Negative $150 here. What would my profits be if I shut down? So if I shut down, what are my profits? Negative fixed costs. How do I figure out my fixed costs? Well, if I'm producing nothing, the only costs I have are fixed costs. So if I think about, I can always like prove this to myself, that as long as the price is above our average variable cost, when I calculate profits, those profits will always be better than my shutdown profits, which were just negative my fixed costs. Now, I don't have to do this every single time. As soon as I see that that price is below average total, I know profits are negative, but it's above my average variable. So I still know that I'm better off staying open than just simply shutting down. Any questions on that? Okay. So, I don't want to do that. Well, yeah, we can go through that here. We got enough time. Any questions on this before we keep moving? Now, top hat question was simply what was that shutdown price? That was just $22.50. But this is how you would use a table to kind of solve for what the profit maximizing level or quantity was, what the resulting profits would be. And you could also double check whether or not you should shut down by comparing that price to your average variable costs. Okay. Any questions on that before we keep moving here? I have a little less time to revisit this, but I do want to go through something that I think is maybe kind of relevant right now. So let's think about, I'm going to try to tie together a lot of what we've been talking about throughout this semester. So let's say I've got my marginal revenue curve. Let's say current firms are earning 0 profits, right? So I was talking about firms always want to do things that lower their total costs, right? What does the government sometimes do that might increase marginal costs that we've talked about? Taxes, or maybe what's going to be in the news or has been in the news, tariffs, right? So what are tariffs going to do? Tariffs are essentially taxes. So what's going to happen to my cost structure? My cost structure is going to increase, right? So I kind of think about, I shift my marginal and average total cost curve. If there's no other changes for demand, that price stays the same, my costs have went up, where's the new profit maximizing quantity? Well, I drew this pretty extreme, right? Quite a bit lower, in which case now what's true about, remember, marginal revenue is the price. So my price is now below my average total cost. I just took firms who were earning no profits. They're now going to be earning what? Price is below average total cost, so profits would be negative, right? As soon as that price is below average total, we know profits are going to be negative. Now, it could have started out those firms were earning positive profits, right? But if I tax them enough, right? So I guess the argument, to be fair, if there were positive profits, well, maybe we push them back to 0. You know, if we're thinking about other countries and we put tariffs on their goods, what's that going to do? They're going to give us fewer things, right? I mean, even if they had positive profits before and we're driving them down to profits of 0, they're going to provide us with fewer things, right? Is that good or bad? Well, if it was making our lives, if we were enjoying those things, it's bad, right? Now, if those products we were worried about, they weren't meeting the same regulations or something that domestic products were, then that might be something that could benefit society, right? So we can start to use these kind of very simple models to dive into these much more complex issues about, well, what's going to happen into like the domestic market versus the foreign market for the same product if we impose tariffs on the foreign market and not the domestic market. We won't dive into those issues, but if you like continue to take econ courses, there's like courses that would literally be like international economics, and you would start to dive into deeper into these issues. But we start out with basically using our very basic models that we're talking about right now with perfect competition. Okay. All right. Thought that was somewhat relevant, also maybe kind of interesting to your interest. So we don't want this as a firm, right? We don't want regulations from the government that are going to drive up our costs. Okay? All right. I think that's all that I have, right? So any questions from me before we kind of get out of here? Before you get too loud and pack up, next week, just as a reminder, there will almost 100% be a video that replaces class on Thursday, okay? It'll have me working through a lot of stuff on a dot cam, so it'll be more of a complete version of what these recordings usually are. Other than that, fun, safe weekend. I'll see you guys on Tuesday.
When the marginal cost will shift to the right.
Yeah.
When?
Will it?
Yeah.
So this would be like anything that a firm can figure out that's going to lower their production. So technology improvements would do that. I can think about using cheaper raw materials, right? If I find something that is cheaper but does the same thing, it could be that maybe I have access to a different labor, right? And I can pay my workers. So anything that is going to lower firms' marginal costs, like it's, you know, a list of like examples would be really long. But yeah, if you want to think about it mainly like technology would be a really good one to always link up to improvements in technology, always going to lose more time. Does that help?
Yeah.